From the News Radio 1120 and 93.7 FM KPNW studios, hola, I am Bill London, America's only honorary illegal alien. Tonight's news brought to you by Dr. Michael Bratland of Chris Dental, where if you call him today, you can see him today. By the way, we do broadcast not only the Wake Up Call, which I'm a co-host of, 6 a.m. to 9, Monday through Fridays, but we also stream worldwide at kpnw.com. All right, here's our news. We're number 9. Yeah. A new WalletHub report analyzed the best states to live in, and Oregon ranked in the top 10 worst states to live. Now, researchers looked at livability factors, everything from housing costs, income growth, education rates, the hospital system, crime, and insurance. Oregon came in as the 9th worst state. Come on, Oregon, you can do better. Let's get to the top 5 worst. A big factor for the ranking was based on housing. Oregon ranking 48th for housing costs, 42nd for home ownership rates. Additionally, Oregon ranked 32nd for the percentage of adults in poor health, 26th for the percent of population in poverty, and 19th for the percent of people who have health insurance. Now, that last number is kind of interesting because it flies in the face of the state's claim that the state has a high rate of health insurance. Additionally, Oregon's safety ranking was low at 47th, which of course raises concerns about crime and overall security. And while we fare better for quality of life, which is pretty much defined as, well, the environment and also how pretty it is, we come in at number 14, which is not bad. But when you compare it to everything else, well, Oregon is in the top 10 and sucking. So it is, and here's why. This is about Ballot Measure 118, and it will be decided by voters in November. And if it's like Ballot Measure 10, which all but legalized drugs here in the state of Oregon, maybe we can push our way out of number 9 into number 6 or number 5. It is a tax now that is so bad that even Oregon's most tax-loving Democrats are against it. Now, Ballot Measure 118 would tax businesses 3% on their gross revenues, not on their taxable revenues. We're talking about total revenues before expenses. And it would give each Oregonian $1,600 a year. Now, we've talked about this before, and you're going to say, $1,600? I thought it was less than that. We'll get to it. So, in a joint statement, 4 powerful Democratic lawmakers in the legislature said the proposed measure to create the state's first universal basic income would hurt companies of all size, hamper state government, and lead to much higher prices for all Oregonians, effectively doing a heck of a lot more harm than good. Businesses would pass the taxes, which multiply with each step of the supply chain onto consumers. It would increase taxes on businesses about $6.5 billion a year. Now, in a joint statement, House Speaker Julie Fahey, House Majority Leader Ben Bowman, Senate President Rob Wagner, and Senate Majority Leader Kathleen Taylor, all Democrats, said, quote, "In these tough times, we all want working families to get every break they can. Measure 118 is not the answer." They went on to say, "We have grave concerns. It'll slow job growth, cause cuts to critical services like road maintenance, firefighting, and addiction recovery." The Democrats joined a fairly large and growing list of 50 Oregon lawmakers, including Governor Tina Kotek, and more than 200 companies and business interests that have expressed their opposition to the measure. The campaign in favor has received significant funding from out of state. Why? Well, because Oregon seems to be the lab rat for bad progressive ideas. The measure's largest contributors at this point are two Los Angeles companies controlled by investor and universal basic income fan Josh Jones. Collectively, those two companies that he's an investor in, contributed $575,000 just to get the measure on the ballot. Now, as far as how much Oregonians would get, well, proponents originally said, well, it would be $750 a month, a year. Well, now somebody's actually done the math, and the number has been revised to $1,600 per resident because the Oregon Department of Administrative Services actually calculated the tax, which would come to right around $14 billion in the 2025 through 2027 biennium. Another bad idea? Sure to happen. So, Oregon State University, they fined and actually suspended a pair of groups who were pro-Palestinian protesters who set camp up on the OSU campus for several weeks back in May. Now, this is an Oregon University that actually has taken some sort of action. OSU has suspended Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights for 3 years and Young Democratic Socialists of America for 1 year as being recognized student organizations that can operate on campus. They fined both of the groups $3,000 along with a student because of the damage that they did to the Memorial Quad. They have to pay the fine by December 15th. So back in 2021, Oregon lawmakers started giving tens of millions of dollars in funding to the Oregon Health Authority to bolster behavioral health and reach marginalized communities in rural pockets of the state where, well, mental health care is pretty scarce. Has it worked? Well, an independent audit that has now become public says the agency can't show the effectiveness of the program because they didn't design any performance metrics to show their impact. So they can't say. Another major problem, a lack of planning, meaning the agency provided insufficient outreach to rural and other underserved communities. As for the money, which they can't say did any good, which totals now over $80 million, it's already been spent. Washington County District Attorney Kevin Barton is saying that there is a bit of a disagreement, and it's with federal officers, and it all has to do with Oregon's sanctuary law. And it's hindering Kevin Barton's ability to get 3 Washington County criminal defendants, 2 of whom are accused of child molestation and the other charged of kidnapping and murder, extradited to the United States from Mexico to stand trial. Why? Barton says each of the defendants have been indicted by a grand jury, and each is believed to be avoiding prosecution by, well, staying in Mexico. Barton says we're not talking about misdemeanors, we're talking about top-of-the-line, high-level cases. And that's why, in his words, this is, quote, such a big deal. So, in order to extradite the defendants back to Oregon, Barton said his office started the paperwork process, which required sending a request to the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of International Affairs. But Barton says the officials from that office told him they will not proceed with any extradition requests unless he and the county sheriff sign an assurance letter promising they'll give officials with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement advance notice if any of those defendants at any point after their extradition are about to be released from the Washington County Jail. That is a violation of Oregon's sanctuary law, which clearly prohibits local officials from helping federal immigration officials track down and arrest illegal aliens by providing information that's not publicly available. So, because of that, these 3 violent criminals, they won't face any time in Oregon because, well, they're protected. State sanctuary laws are being hotly debated on the federal level, as well as by some lawmakers. Almost all of them are Republicans here in Oregon. And of course, Democrats run the show in Oregon, and so that law will never change. All right, I debated about whether to do this story or not, but I think I will. And it has to do with Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Now, Gorsuch last week gave a speech at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library down in Simi Valley, California. And his main topic of conversation, besides the fact that he has a book that's coming out that was co-written, was that the United States has far too many laws. Now, he said there have been a number of people that have tried to count how many laws that there are in the United States, and they've been stymied because they're countless. They've been dumbfounded by the amount of them. And if you think about it, Gorsuch mentions, of course, not only laws and however many thousand of them that are created every year on Capitol Hill and with our legislative bodies there, but then you have state legislative bodies. Then you have rules put into place by non-elected officials. You have counties that create their own laws and municipalities. So there's lots of laws that touch just about every part of our life. And as Gorsuch mentioned, he said there's probably not one person living in the United States that on a regular basis doesn't violate some sort of law and just doesn't realize it. And he says that needs to change. Now, he gave a couple of examples and did a little bit more research into these things. Gorsuch told his audience about a guy named Marty Hahn. He's a Missouri magician, who mostly spends his time entertaining at kids' parties. Well, after one of Hahn's magic shows, the Department of Agriculture from Missouri showed up, flipped their badges out, and asked if he had a license for a rabbit that he used in his performance. He didn't. Hahn then had to apply for an animal exhibitor license for his rabbit, but he was also told that he legally needed to provide an emergency preparedness plan for the animal. He was required to hire a consultant to write a 28-page plan to cover everything from chemical spills to hurricanes in Missouri, and a department official came to his home to inspect it. This plan, by the way, has to be posted near the hutch where the rabbit lives. An emergency plan for a freaking rabbit that he pulls out of a hat. Here's the emergency plan, probably. Grab the rabbit, throw it in the car, and leave. Then he gave an even more amazing story, and this has to do with a guy named John Yates. He's a fisherman out of Florida. And Yates, and he's a professional fisherman, Yates had been out at sea for several days when a government inspector pulled up alongside his boat and said that he had to make sure that every fish that he'd caught was at least longer than the legal minimum of 20 inches. So the inspector poured out all of the fish from the boat's hold and found that 72 were a small bit shorter than the legal requirement. However, the inspector had measured the fish only to their nose and not to the end of their jaw, which is how these particular fish are required by law to be measured. So he didn't even measure them correctly. Now, Yates went back to port, and inspectors there did a second inspection. this time finding incorrectly, but still finding 69 fish, not the 72. That is a deficit of 3. Now, Yates was given a ticket and a small fine, thought that it was the end of the matter, until 3 years later, armed federal agents came to his house and arrested him for violating the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is a law that was passed after accountants shredded evidence in the Enron scandal. It's an accounting law because he was 3 fish short. He was accused of destroying evidence by throwing 3 fish overboard. Then he was put on criminal trial, where he was convicted and was sentenced by the judge to a month in jail. He took his case to the Supreme Court. He won the case, but by then he had completely lost his commercial fishing business. Well, this look at the news brought to you by Dr. Michael Bratland of Chris Dental. Rick, go ahead and get real.